Today we're talking about one of the most dangerous forces in diving. Not equipment failure, not gas management, not even the environment. We are talking about your own perception of your abilities, the Dunning-Kruger effect. A psychological trap where the less you know, the more confident you feel, and the more experienced you become, the more you start to question everything. Well, sometimes. This is the DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcast, and I'm your host, scuba instructor trainer and underwater filmmaker Nick the Rooter. Welcome back everybody to another episode of the DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcast, the podcast companion to the DiveSAGA YouTube channel, and you can of course also find us on Instagram. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the Dunning-Kruger effect, because in scuba training we learn a lot about Boyle's law, Dalton's law, Archimedes' principle, and a whole bunch of skills and equipment. And that's all very important. But what we don't really learn about, and what I don't see in very many curriculums, is the Dunning-Kruger effect. The theory that best describes human blind spots about our own shortcomings. So in this episode of the DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcast, I would like to discuss what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, how certifications versus competence play into that, survivor bias, the role of the instructor in all this, and maybe also very important, the role of training agencies in all this, the risk of social proof, and of course, most importantly, how we as scuba divers can avoid falling into the trap of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Quick thanks to our sponsor for today, which is In-Depth Magazine. In-Depth isn't about gear hype or clickbait, it's about real dive stories, real explorers, and real underwater science. If you enjoyed this podcast, you'll probably love the kind of long-form articles and photography they publish, as they also cover these types of unique dive sites and underwater stories. You can find In-Depth Magazine online or in print, and by supporting them, you're helping keep serious dive journalism alive. Surf to www.indepthmag.com and start reading and learning for free today. So what is the Dunning-Kruger effect? It is essentially a cognitive bias where people with low experience or low skill level tend to systematically overestimate their own ability, while highly skilled individuals or higher skilled individuals tend to underestimate themselves, or at least question their own abilities. So at its core, that's about metacognition, about our ability to accurately judge our own competence, which is of course a hard thing to do. It is very difficult to know what you know and don't know, especially to know what you don't know, I would argue. So here's the key problem, right? The same lack of knowledge that makes you inexperienced also makes you unable to recognize how inexperienced you actually are, because you might overestimate how much of the available knowledge you already know, because you simply do not know the knowledge that you don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to me. So in diving terms, a new tech diver, for instance, might not fully understand gas planning, failure modes, stress cascades, task loading, or the human error chain. So they literally cannot see the risks that they're taking in relation to that. And therefore they might think they're safe because they cannot imagine the risks that they are exposing themselves to. And only more training can actually clarify those risks and make them understand those risks, which also means that the more people advance their own training, the more they start realizing how much they didn't know, and therefore they're better able to estimate how much they may not know yet. This is all based on, as I said, the Dunning-Kruger principle or the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a curve. Of course, this is a podcast, but I have put a little bit of a curve in the thumbnail, and I'll put a link below in the description as well. But essentially, it's a two-axis curve with the horizontal axis displaying competence and the vertical axis displaying confidence. And very quickly, at the very beginning of the competence stage, so where divers know almost nothing, the confidence level will shoot up really sharply. So in other words, people start training and very quickly think that as they are learning, they are becoming really good at something. But then very quickly, as they start learning more, this confidence peak starts declining rapidly. By the way, this confidence peak is often referred to as the peak of Mount Stupid, because again, you have very low competence but very high confidence. As we then get a little bit more confident, the peak starts declining rapidly into what is commonly referred to as the Valley of Despair. That's because we now realize that as we learn a little bit more, we start seeing that there is so much more to learn, and we suddenly rate our own skill levels, our own knowledge levels fairly low. And then from there, as we continue training, the curve gradually rises up. This is called the slope of enlightenment, to eventually plateau out a little bit into the plateau of sustainability. People with extreme high knowledge or competence levels will usually somewhat accurately estimate their skill and knowledge and have a appropriately high confidence level that is perhaps not rising significantly, but is stable, is a plateau. So this is the Dunning-Kruger effect. What that means is, in initial exposure, there is a real confidence spike, hence the reference to Mount Stupid, because we learn new concepts, whether that is scuba diving itself, or whether maybe when we become a trimix diver, we learn trimix, we think we've now mastered the use of helium-based gases. And so we feel like we've unlocked the system. And that is, of course, very, very dangerous. And it is not until the first real challenges where we see a confidence crash, so where the Valley of Despair actually reveals itself. So task loading, poor visibility, missed procedures, real problems really that suddenly make things feel very unstable, which is a good thing as long as it doesn't lead to serious accidents, of course. And it is only when we then start building up experience that we have this slow competence buildup before we can reach the expert phase, where we have calm, measured confidence. So I would argue that the most dangerous moment in all this isn't necessarily your very first dive, because arguably as you first start scuba diving, or as you first start maybe technical diving or CCR diving or cave diving, usually those initial training moments are challenging, and we do realize that this is new, that this is perhaps difficult or challenging, and we realize that there are many things that we do not know. So we don't necessarily feel in control in those very first moments, but the real danger probably hits somewhere around the certification stage, where we are basically signed off and we're told, okay, you've learned the procedures, you've executed them without incident, so now you start believing that you understand the system. But in reality, you've only experienced all of those conditions during training, during ideal conditions, during maybe supervised environments. So you haven't seen failure yet. And I think that lack of negative feedback can often be misread as competence. Certifications play into this. Now, certifications are of course necessary and are a fair and valid result of completed training. You need certification to prove that training has been completed, because it proves that you can reliably perform skills, that you do have certain knowledge. But again, it's important to realize that this is under supervision and that this is in controlled conditions. Certification does not really prove decision making under stress, depending on the training agency and the instructor. Like some instructors will lean in a lot more into stress creation during training and decision making under stress. Certifications do not prove your level of adaptability when plans fail, and they also don't really prove your psychological resilience. So the danger is really when divers start treating certification as a green light to just go, instead of as a license to start learning. And I know that seems somewhat contradictory, because a certification is when the learning is, at least in theory, complete. But there is a difference between certification and readiness. And I think that as a student, you can avoid the Dunning-Kruger effect as well by separating the two. I am certified should mean I am now allowed to start learning this properly on my own. It doesn't mean I am now fully ready and experienced for this environment. So practically, how you can sort of arrange your odds in favor of yourself against the Dunning-Kruger effect is, I think after certification, you should prioritize logging maybe 20, 30 dives in similar conditions as your training without increasing complexity. So don't immediately seek out the furthest ends of what your certification allows you to do, but really try to dive within similar situations, similar conditions, similar settings as your training for at least 20, 30 dives, and log those religiously and analyze religiously, not just depth or dive time or whatever, but how you felt and how that went. Survivor bias is also a real thing, yeah? The illusion of clean dives, because when a dive feels smooth, when there's good visibility, when the team is stable, when there are no equipment issues, when the plan gets executed properly, that can create a false narrative of I handled this really well and I know what I'm doing. So a well-executed dive doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't do anything right or did something wrong, but it simply means it went well, and therefore there's no data to prove how you would have done if something went wrong. You can do something 100 times without problems and think that you're simply very good at it, but all that means is that you've really just been able to do it 100 times without things going wrong. The real question is, how do you perform when things do go wrong? And again, you can of course stack the odds in your favor by choosing an instructor who really pushes you, who does create unstable situations during training, who does require you to think on your feet and adapt. But again, nothing can really wish away the presence of that instructor. So no matter how good they are and no matter how well they can simulate stressful situations, the knowledge that there is always someone more experienced present to fix the problem should any arise is still a very it's a bit of a safety cushion that you do not have during real problems. So be careful by counting your successful dives as a tally of your experience. I think it's the dives where problems arise that are a little bit more useful. Now, if you dive long enough, at some point something is going to break. You're going to get task loaded. You might lose buoyancy, you might miss decompression stops, heaven forbid. You might get navigation confusion, whether that be in open water or in the cave. But suddenly you get that realization of, oh shit, I'm not in control as much as I thought I was. And that is the most important phase in a diver's life, in my opinion. That's the exact moment where your awareness increases and where your awareness of your lack of skill or your lack of knowledge increases, and where your ego gets a huge punch in the nose. And rightly so, like that's okay. As long as you're able to read that for what it is and move beyond that, then that's totally fine, because that is what actually accelerates learning. Yeah, in order for you to get better, you actually have to experience being pretty bad at it. If you only have breezy times during training and breezy times during your dives and everything goes smoothly all the time, you're actually not learning as much as you think you are. It feels great and you will feel great about yourself and your own abilities, but you're not actually learning. So I think it's very important for us as divers to embrace this sort of valley of despair moment, this moment where we realize that we fucked up, we have, we had issues that we weren't able to handle as well as we hoped we would. If if you can embrace that, you will become a safer diver. I think it's divers who manage to sort of avoid every time these dangerous situations. They're actually more dangerous divers. And I know that's somewhat contradictory. I don't know if you can wrap your head around that. It makes perfect sense to me. But so obviously don't seek out dangerous situations. Don't create difficult, dangerous dives, because again, you should dive well within the limits of your certifications and seek out similar conditions. But keep diving until you run into issues, and if you're then able to handle them, overcome them, and grow through them, that's, I think, the desired path of growth. Of course, a lot of this is initially shaped by your instructor. I think students rely very heavily on their dive instructor feedback, and if instructors pass their students a little too easily by just doing skills by themselves for their own sake, for instance, if instructors avoid hard criticism, and I mean like founded, like properly argumented hard criticism, they're doing the student a disservice. I know it's not nice as an instructor and an instructor trainer myself. You have to also grow into that as an instructor to learn to deliver harsh but fair criticism over customer satisfaction, right? If we refer to the student as the customer, then I think that a student hearing what they need to hear, as long as it's well-founded and as long as it's respectful and as long as it offers proper solutions, then I think that's far more important than how they feel and their satisfaction. Because the last thing you should do as an instructor is create overconfident divers. Yeah, creating confident divers is of course great, but overconfident divers is of course super dangerous, and perhaps more accurately, underprepared decision makers. So I think in scuba training, definitely in technical training, but I think in all scuba training, giving honest feedback is not a harsh thing to do. I think it's the appropriate thing to do, and it can potentially be life-saving. To be honest, maybe when I first started teaching, we sort of learned that we should never give harsh feedback. Like we always learned the little criticism sandwich. I really liked how you did this. However, I noticed you made a mistake there. The solution is XYZ. And while that's valid and that works to some extent, I think there is really something to say for highlighting that certain serious mistakes can cause death. And I do that more and more, where I'm just much more explicit in highlighting what the consequences are of certain incorrect actions or certain mistakes. And I not that every mistake needs to be highlighted as "or you will die," but it is important, I think, to level with your students and to be super real about that. Of course, there is also this agency issue, because it's not all the instructors. It's also a bit onto how the whole system is set up. There's a lot of courses that can be done back to back, nitrox, advanced, deco, trimix, and so forth. There's a lot of Tech 40, 45, 50, or even just open water, advanced rescue. They're all often structured in such a way that they invite you into the next step. And of course, I'm not arguing against continuous training. I think a diver in training is one of the best things there is, and we should always sort of have our next project lined up or be in a class at some point. It's super healthy, it's super good for you. But without time between those courses, there is no time for skills to consolidate. There is no time for knowledge to ferment and to enlarge in a little bit, and there is no time for you to develop your stress responses. So experience is not something that you're taught in a course, right? Experience is what you survive, analyze, and integrate over time. And the system doesn't necessarily reward experience. Like most training systems reward advancement. They reward the next certification, level 1, level 2, level 3, and so on. And so yeah, it encourages progression over reflection, and I think and even achievement over mastery in a way, right? Because if we agree that you can only achieve mastery by experience after certification, and the certification is sort of what's sold as the achievement, then yeah, it is achievement over mastery, which is, I get, of course, that that's the easiest way to organize course structures, but again, real competence comes from repetition, right? From maybe a variety of conditions, from making mistakes and adapting to them. So the safest divers are not like the most certified divers. They're not like the ones with the most certification cards, although they've spent a lot of time with instructors, which is really good. I think the more seasoned divers are the ones who probably are safer, although it is a double-edged sword, because of course if you learn something and then go your merry way and you part from your instructor, and you maybe over time sort of start doing things a little bit incorrectly, or start doing them, quote, your own way, and there's no check-in points regularly with good instructors to like catch things slipping, then that's maybe also dangerous. So again, I am a real big fan of like constant training and like being constantly in training or constantly working towards something. But if you do that without the experience dives in between, I think then you're perhaps on a bit of a hollow trajectory. Social proof can also be a real trap. I mean, we did an episode right here on the DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcast about social media in scuba diving, and it's, while I'm a big fan of it and I think social media does a lot to promote good diving habits, the thing is that you do see, and I'm guilty for this as well, but you do see a lot of like deep diving, cave diving, like very advanced, rebreather diving, or lots of scuba cylinders, extreme environments, because that's of course the stuff that's intriguing. It's the stuff that generates clicks and likes and interaction and whatnot. But what you don't see or don't often see is the training history behind that, yeah, or the failed dives or the near misses. Yeah, it sort of creates a false baseline of like what normal diving looks like. And I think I said that in one of the previous podcasts as well, but like it's very easy to be nice and neutrally buoyant and perfectly hovering in trim on an Instagram photo. But we've all had dives that were absolute catastrophes or total clown shows, and but of course we're not going to post those, because they invite perhaps too much criticism, and also it's not the example we want to give, but it is of course the reality that sometimes things simply do not go as well as they should go. And again, when you like scroll Instagram or whatever, you're always going to see a good news show, and you're always going to see people doing like really cool shit, but that isn't necessarily a representative of how they got there. They didn't become those super awesome, great and technically correct divers overnight, right? There's usually like a very long trajectory of struggle. People don't get open water certified and become cave divers the next day. There's often years in between, and I think that is of course something that like we don't see as much, and perhaps as new divers we're not informed about as much. So it's very enticing to try to go very fast, very quickly, to get to that level that we aspire to get to without putting in the time. So the question is, of course, how can we avoid falling into the trap of the Dunning-Kruger effect? And I think it's something that you don't beat at once. Like, it's not like, oh, you do this one trick and you will never fall victim to the Dunning-Kruger effect. I think it's something that you have to manage continuously. Yeah, and the goal is not to like kill your confidence. It's not that you're not allowed to be confident. It's that you have to calibrate your confidence into reality. So that when you dive, you actually have a better grasp on the situation that you're in. So I think one of them is for yourself is to separate that certification from actual readiness. Like, take courses and take lots of them. Like, take lots of courses, spend lots of time with instructors, but don't see the certification card as readiness. It's nothing else than just a green light from a professional to say, okay, now you can start practicing what we've done, and then add 20 to 30 dives after certification every time, I think. Another thing you can do is, and I have to be careful to say this, but you can sort of actively seek out failure. As long as you do it in controlled ways, I think it's really useful to do that. But of course, you have to make sure you don't create actually dangerous situations. But I'm thinking of things like, ending dives without a mask. Like if you know you're close to home, you can safely get out, perhaps you have no more decompression obligations, try to do those dives, end those dives without a mask. Or maybe if you're a rebreather diver, I often advocate for bail out regularly, like bail out and finish the dive on bailout, and because it's maybe something you don't do all that much, and so doing it regularly while you're not stressed is going to help you greatly when you do need it when you are stressed. Or you can do this, of course, with your teammates, or even with your instructor. Like, you don't necessarily need to hire an instructor for a new course. Most instructors will be happy to be hired for challenge dives or stress test dives or breakdown dives, where they're still in control, but they'll just give you a hard time, and they'll push you to your limits within your current skill set. Another thing you can do, I think, to avoid the Dunning-Kruger effect trap is to just debrief brutally honest, like with your team. Like, where did I mess up or almost mess up? Like, how did I look? Was I unstable? Did the dive feel rushed? Instead of, like, a lot of people will do a dive and then sort of crack open a beer and say, oh, that was awesome. And that is such a waste of a perfectly good opportunity to extract a lot of information and like seek out within each other. You don't have to be overly critical to one another. You don't have to destroy each other's confidence. But I think having a team where you have the safety to be self-critical and critical of each other probably makes you a lot better. And try to, and this is hard, but try to surround yourself with better divers than yourself. Like, nothing calibrates your self-perception faster than being surrounded by people who are all a lot better than you. It puts everything a lot more into perspective, for sure. I often have that when I go shooting for the DiveSAGA channel, and I team up with divers and explorers and whatnot. It often puts me in my place because they know so much more and they're so much more experienced, and they just have such a much higher skill level. And nothing recalibrates me better than that every time. And that's incredibly valuable because it instantly exposes your blind spots, of course. I also mentioned it earlier, but like, track your experience, like log your I don't want to say log your feelings, but maybe like log the way you felt during dives and how you handled them. Like we're all used to like logging depth, time, temperature, whatnot, but like, how was the visibility? How did that make you feel? Did you feel task loaded? Did you, how was your trim? Like, did you feel in control that way? Were there any failures? How did you handle them? By reflecting on that, almost like journaling a little bit, by reflecting on that, you internalize a lot more these type of skills and the handling of problems in stressful situations. Because competence is essentially variety plus repetition, I think. And then you're not just diving. You're like, every dive is now a training dive. You can also delay your progression on purpose, of course. Just because you can take the next course also doesn't always mean you should. Just because you can make a dive more complicated doesn't always mean you should. I often have to like hold students back or tell them like, hey, we don't need to do this, or we don't need to go to the maximum certification depth for this course. Like, there's a range of depth within which we can play. And I think that normalizing taking it slow is definitely something that's very, very useful. Just like normalizing aborting dives, for instance, right? That it's totally okay to give the thumbs up and say, I need to get out of here, and not having the team question that. Debrief it, right? Debrief it and debrief it as harshly as it needs to be. to be valuable. But like calling a dive early is a success, not a failure, right? Like calling a dive early and surviving it and knowing why you did that is, in my opinion, a total success and a great learning opportunity. And invite criticism, right? Be inviting of criticism, and not, and you have to mean it. Like, you have to ask your buddies or ask your instructors, like, what did I do poorly? Like, can you please tell me, give me 2-3 key points that I can work on? And if they have alternative suggestions, that's obviously better. Like, just pointing out what's wrong is not super useful, but if they can point out how to fix it, and then you can actually implement that on your next dives, that's obviously great. And I think lastly, like, it, at the end of the day, it's onto you to adopt a long-term identity around all this, that you're not, like, you don't need to be a badass. You don't need to be like a crazy diver who needs all the gear and all the certifications. Like, the best thing you can do for yourself is to just adopt this identity of someone who is cautious, who, like, I'm personally very conservative in everything that I do, especially because I drag a camera into 90% of the dives, which makes it more complicated. And so I think, like, the moment you feel like, okay, I've got it figured out, that usually means you've missed something really important. So it's better to make it your identity to say, I don't know everything about this, and I know that I don't know everything about this, and that's why I would like to take it slow, or that's why I would like to be a little more conservative. To me, those are the best ways to avoid the Dunning-Kruger effect. But it is such an important thing in diving and in dive training to be aware of this phenomenon, because you do not know what you don't know, and that's an incredible blind spot. So hopefully this discussion about the Dunning-Kruger effect made that a little bit less of a blind spot. I want to thank you guys for listening, and I also want to thank In-Depth Magazine for supporting the DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcast. Make sure to seek out the DiveSAGA YouTube channel, subscribe to that. You can actually click the join button and support us structurally, and that helps a lot. And of course, you can also follow the DiveSAGA Instagram page. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you next time.